it's unacceptable. And I think more and more people are waking up to that realization. And some people have resigned from reading news altogether. The everyday person has been overwhelmed, has been misinformed, has been solicited, and has been influenced at every step of the journey of them trying to catch up with what's going on in the world. And that's terrible.
Kira, welcome to the World XP Podcast. How you doing today?
Thank you, Eric. Delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, 100%. So let's do a quick intro for the people, kind of who you are and what you do and what you're up to, what your company does, and then we'll just hop right into it because we've got loads to talk about and semi-limited time. So the
Yes,
floor
sir.
is yours, my friend.
Well, thank you for having me, Eric. I am Kira Shishkin. I am the CEO of Informed, which is it's the news concierge for the everyday person to beat what we call misinformation overload, which is rampant in the media, especially news media specifically. And so we've been building that and providing people a way to stay informed without being influenced. And that's informed. Keen to tell you that story, keen to tell you my story, wherever you want to take it.
Yeah. So the question from the last guest, I think, will be a good way to start. And usually they are, but this one in particular, if you could design a personal North Star, a single guiding principle that every decision and relationship in your life had to align with that, what would it be, and how would it change the way you live starting tomorrow?
I love that. I think there has been an evolution in my view of success over the years. I think in the earlier days, it was about how can I be the most successful person I can be. And in the latter days, and kind of ongoing now and recently, it's actually shifted to how can I make others as successful as possible, and that will be the marker and the signal of my own personal success. So I think empowering others, making them successful, empowering your community, whoever that is, no matter how small or big your community is, I think that's a North Star that I'm staying true to, and I recommend it to anyone who's looking for a North Star and purpose in their life.
Yeah, that's a great answer. That's a great answer. One, you just had it ready to go, which was kind of impressive. But two, it's like that's if more people did that, empowered the others around them, like that's what you want. You want people to empower others around you, and but you also want to have a sense of responsibility for yourself, and oftentimes that gives you some level of purpose, which then when you get out of bed, you're not like, oh, my life sucks today. You have something to do with your time and meaning because you see the growth, like whether you're coaching or doing other things, you see the improvement in your players, or for you, you see the improvement in your business, and people tell you, oh yeah, I didn't know about this story today, and you're like, I was able to bring this. Also, all those sorts of things. Yeah, it's a great answer. Before we go into informed, out of my own curiosity, so you've got loads of stuff about investment banking and venture capital and things of that nature. And for those, and myself included, that have heard those words before and have no idea what any of them really mean, like you hear, oh, venture capital, they just give money to people to build businesses. But like, what is that? What do these things actually mean? Well, one, how did you get into that? Or like, where was the kind of the driver for you to be like, yeah, I want to go into venture capital? Because like people hear that and it's like, oh, that's like the Silicon Valley like weirdo billionaire types that are. I won't finish that sentence. But anyways, like, so what is it? What happens at those sorts of businesses? How do they make money, right? You talk about if you give like investments into businesses and sometimes those businesses don't work, but it seems to be a very aggressive, at least out in Silicon Valley, it seems to be a very aggressive strategy, like lots of money very quickly, lots of growth very quickly. Like help the people kind of wrap their heads around the concept of venture capital and investment banking and like what it is and how it works.
Absolutely. There's so much to unpack there, Eric, but I would love to give it a go. So I would categorize all these names you just said, all these words, into a category of yes, finance, but I would even specifically say it's high finance. It's like some of the most I would say it's pretty prestigious, it's pretty high demand, it's also extremely demanding roles that are essentially at the top pinnacle of money allocation in the world of capital, in the world of money. So it's not the same thing as doing, sort of commercial banking when you're like at your Wells Fargo and the bank teller is helping you out with your savings. It's also not the same as, talking to a financial advisor who's giving you advice generically as to like what you should do, how you should optimize your portfolio investments. These are slightly different things. This area of what I call high finance is professions that are very much in demand because they're very lucrative, but they're also extremely demanding. You essentially have to sacrifice a lot of your personal time or forget your 9 to 5. You kind of give up a lot of your time, effort, energy, stress, health to be in those roles, but they're high on decision making because they actually do allocate resources to ideas and to businesses. And so there are two types of kind of categories within the high finance world. It's the public side, which is investing in stocks and in the stock market, which is something that I think to the everyday person is much more visible, right? The stock market is up, it's down. There's an IPO, people are buying stocks. That's the public side, and that's where hedge funds and rather types of mutual funds live. Those are like large investment vehicles. And what we're talking about here, and what you mentioned, is the private side, which is private capital that doesn't go through the stock market. And in that private capital world, which can also be called private equity, there is a subgenre that is very loud and very important, which is venture capital. And another way of saying it's the earliest of stages of private equity, where you don't have like a 30-year-old business and is now looking for a growth injection to expand to another market. That's an older private equity play. It's super early innings, their first year, their second year, and they're looking to scale and grow very quickly because to them, in their market, in their business model, they can only succeed if they grow very quickly, unprofitably. But then once they take the market, they can actually start making money. And we've seen that with many technology businesses, which is why venture capital is often synonymous with technology investment. And so that's what venture capital is. It isn't as simple as just giving somebody money because it's in exchange for equity. So you become a partner and a stakeholder in the business. And there's a lot of scrutiny that goes into that decision. But I would also say there are different strategies. I think one thing that you hinted at is a strategy of spray and pray. There are some funds, and they're growing in number. They're investing very little, but they're investing them everywhere. So to make sure they're covering all the bases and they have at least some chance of hitting a winner, hitting a Uber size, Lyft size, DoorDash size company. And there are much more concentrated bets where folks invest, 4 companies a year, maybe even less, but they try to only bet on the winners and then they go all in on those winners. So that's kind of a nutshell view. I have had the pleasure, the fortune and misfortune of starting my career in that world through investment banking and private equity and venture capital. And it's been really enriching because if you're a young person and you don't know what you want to do, that's a really good place to go. Why? Because it teaches you a lot and it shows you where in the world you might actually fit in if you don't want to do finance for the rest of your life, which most people don't. You eventually find your calling within an industry and you take that as leverage of training and leverage of background, but then you wind up getting a real job.
Yeah. So just looking at your like LinkedIn, is the nature of the business, it seems like you bounced around a little bit. Is that part of like how that works, the fast moving and you go somewhere else and then you like how does it work from because different industries have different things that they look at for somebody who has like I'll say air quotes experience. Right, like if I'm hiring maybe in a different industry and I see all these things, I'm like, huh, he has bounced around a lot. Maybe that's a red flag. But in venture capital, it seems like that isn't the case just due to how fast paced it is.
I would say there is kind of two answers to that. One is I think generally the professional culture has been changing a lot where, 2 years at a company is a lot in Silicon Valley. People are moving around all the time because you can really plateau in a role pretty quickly, especially in technology. And if you want to keep growing, you want to keep cross-pollinating the insights, but keep growing in different directions. You maybe would stick with a certain function, but you would do that across multiple firms. or you would even rotate within a single firm of many different functions, or you would do both of those switches at the same time. There's also a very big shift when somebody goes to business school. They typically come out of that transformed into a different type of professional, which is a welcome change most of the time. So I think there's just generally a trend towards decreased loyalty to companies and an increased focus on kind of being a craftsperson that is attached to the craft, but not to the employer or the specific job. In my case specifically, and in a case with venture capital, I think of it more as venture capital is a personality type. It is it's a lifestyle choice, and it's an attraction to building companies. And when you're in the venture world, you don't always have ideas for what you're going to do next, what you're going to build, but you would be attracted to helping people build if you're not building yourself. And so think of the venture world as you're either helping people build and then you're working in venture capital, or you're building yourself, meaning you're doing an incubation somewhere, maybe doing an incubation of a company in a fund or in a company, which we've done, and or you are actually just in the wild building a company. And so you're shifting pretty quickly because you want to not be attached to any idea, because ideas can be really bad and you don't want to spend years working on an idea, and switch quickly to something that you feel is actually pulling you and the market is showing you signs and this is the right thing to be building. And so I say that's probably a good explainer for why there's a lot of movement in venture capital, and there should be. There's a lot of movement in tech, and there should be.
That makes sense. And the reason I was listening to an interview with Brian Armstrong recently, and I mentioned this on the last show that I did as well, but for a different reason. And he was taking, oh yeah, the first round of funding, we were aiming to get 1 million, but we only got 400K or whatever. Like when they talk about going through rounds of funding, it makes it seem like you go to like a career fair or something, and you go pitch your like kind of like Shark Tank-esque. It like what does that mean for you? Like, is that how that act? Did I give a good summary, or am I completely off base on that?
I love that. And it is a little bit like a career fair. The issue is you kind of have to also build the career fair yourself, right? Every raise for every company, it's a very demanding and like a full-time responsibility. So it's very distracting, right? If you're building and you don't need money, I very much like to suggest that unless you are unable to do anything without money, uh, you know, you should probably put that on the back burner or bring in a partner in a business whose whole job will be fundraising, and you can focus on the business because it's so immersive and really quite difficult. But it is essentially it's a collection of going to established spaces where we can call them the career fairs, where there are conferences, there are gatherings, there are hackathons, there are various types of forums for you to get exposure. But such a big part of fundraising is actually just cold calling, cold outreach, cold emailing, social media, putting yourself out there in other ways, connecting with all the people in your community, in your world that have any connections to venture capitalists or other different types of investors, or just people with capital that have wealth to invest, which don't have to be professional investors. It could be more experienced entrepreneurs who've already built a legacy. It's extremely time consuming and it takes a long time, right? It's not something that you wake up one morning like, hey, we're going to raise money today. And by the end of the week, you're done. It takes months and quarters, I would say, to find alignment with investors that are truly there for the right reasons, that truly are the right fit for your company, and are willing to take a risk on you as the founding team and on the company as the idea in that current iteration of an idea. And so it's an ongoing process. It takes many months. It's not quick. And it's a mix of going to those forums and also creating your own lists, reaching out and sort of, pitching your case, your company nonstop for months until you get one yes on 1,000 no's.
Mm, that makes sense. All right, last kind of question on this, and then because we gotta talk about your about Informed. But so there's a do you know Andreessen Horowitz? I assume you're
Absolutely.
familiar with that. So they have started to move in at least partially to these like kind of defense and DHS and they call it the American Dynamism like portfolio or
Sure.
whatever. And the the government sort of acquisitions process can be slow, and that's not news to anybody. And it doesn't seem like these sorts of things um, mix venture capital with government. What is the rationale behind that if you had to put yourself in those shoes? Because on the one hand, it seems very exciting, right? A few of these guys have been SpaceX engineers, and the technology seems very exciting. They're building autonomous ships and AI things and all these things that are like, oh, sci-fi, see it in Star Wars, yada yada. But like, what's the like? I'm on one hand, I'm like, wow, that's cool. Like that would probably be useful for defense or for security or whatever. And then on the other hand, I'm like, well, when is are these things ever going to be purchased? And so from a venture capital perspective, like what's the rationale there?
Yeah. I love that you mentioned it, and you've been asking all these questions to inform our listeners, but it sounds like you actually know a fair amount about venture capital since you mentioned Andreessen Horowitz and their whole theme around American dynamism. That is one of the biggest names in the game, and I would say is probably the best of the best. There's a couple, but Andreessen Horowitz is an excellent investor, and they've been around for so long. They've helped build the industry, and I would say kind of two answers to your question. One is yes, the ambiance or the aesthetic of defense and government contracts is slow moving and doesn't remind us of venture capital. But it doesn't have to be that way because there's a lot of young robotics companies that have use cases for defense that are being built in a garage. And I do believe that Andreessen Horowitz is just as interested in seeding or investing early in them as it is in those larger, slower moving contracts. And so there is still an entrepreneurial layer, like an early stage venture layer, even in defense, because there's a lot of like early stage robotics companies, early stage, how can we build an autonomous ship? How can we build an autonomous rocket? How can we build autonomous, components? How can we just build robots to assist these things? So I think that's not a that's not a small part of it. So there's a venture layer in that world. But the second answer is more reflecting on the growth of Andreessen Horowitz as a company. They've been in the game for so long that they used to invest, early stage, double down on things, but they've now become so humongous. I do think they're probably one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest, most capitalized fund where there's actually too much money that they have, where the early stage venture class, the entire category, cannot handle that money, right? Because like if you have an idea and you need to raise money for it at the earliest of stages, it's not going to do you a lot of good, not to the investor or to the entrepreneur. If you need it $1 million, you shouldn't get $10 million. Like it doesn't make sense. You need to take the money that you need and use that for what you need. Don't just get money for free for no reason, for just no real justification. It leads to bubbles, it leads to misalignment in expectations, it leads to failure essentially. And so there's actually more money in the Andreessen Horowitz checkbook than the entirety of, I'm probably being a little bit extreme, but I think it's not too far from truth because you also don't invest in any company. You want to invest in the best of companies. And if you look at the entire category of like the early stage venture, there is too much money in the checkbook to fund the entirety of the class. So one of the things we're seeing is the spray and pray model, where they're investing virtually in every single one to kind of cover all their bases because they have the money to do it. But two is they're moving up market. They're moving out from the venture class category onwards to the rest of the private equity realm, which means later stage, which means more industries that don't look like the traditional early stage tech startup. And that's just a function of having more and more money that they need to be able to deploy so that their investors feel like, okay, my money is deployed. It's not just sitting on a shelf. I think that's part of what's happening with Andreessen and what's been happening with Andreessen A16Z for quite a few years.
That makes sense. So I was listening to an interview with Dr. Richard Werner. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was talking about banks basically investing in small firms, which kind of in terms of economic growth is where like things the private investment into small businesses and startups and like that seems to me the more I've been researching it seems to be just like unequivocally the way to go generally speaking like if you want to build innovation and businesses and keep people employed and have the next best thing like I don't know it just seems to be. Anyways, um, okay. So for Informed, is this something that you are pursuing as the entrepreneur, like on the entrepreneurial side now? Are you pursuing this sort of VC funding? And so how does it work from that side? If the answer is
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. And so I think that's a super important question because I've been in the venture world for some time. I've invested in companies. I've, helped others invest in companies. I've helped a lot of companies raise funding. And just having seen and lived that experience, I actually believe that there is a myth in Silicon Valley culture, in tech culture, in just startup culture that tells you you need to raise money no matter what. Unless you raise money, you're not legitimate and you're not going to make it. And it's like, you're not serious unless you raise money. I think that actually only applies to a fraction of cases, right? Is like there are business models and there are companies that do need venture capital in order to succeed. Um, I don't think every company under the sun needs venture capital or even outside funding in order to succeed. And so, in the case with Informed, which is the company that we are incubating now within the general structure of my investment vehicle, I actually don't look forward to raising outside capital. So, in some ways, you could say it's bootstrapped. The company's bootstrapped, even though we're leveraging some like larger sums of internal capital. It is just our own capital. We don't have outside investors. We're not looking to raise outside money in any way, at least for the time being. And that's because the business that we're building and the idea that we have is actually, we don't need it. We don't need money. And I would say you better have a really strong reason to find investment. If you don't have a very strong reason to, raise venture, don't do it. It's extremely distracting. It's extremely disorienting as an experience. And if you have a model that doesn't require it, don't force it upon the model, right? There is this concept of product market fit that I'm sure you're aware of, which is fitting the idea that you have to the market. But that is just an entryway concept. There is not just a product market fit, there is a product channel fit. There's a channel market fit. And then there's also, I would say, a business model market, business model channel, business model business product fit. So that a lot of things need to kind of fall into place. It's not just product market. There's a lot of things that need to, you can think of it as a chart, so kind of like a four-way square, where each square on the it's going to be hard to explain. So imagine four squares that kind of all link to each other. There needs to be a fit across every single one of them. The product, the market, the channel, the business model. And I would add to that model of the capital. Sort of that's the investment piece. And there needs to be a fit with all those things. And we just don't currently have a need or a fit with our business model, with our market, with our product, with our channel for capital. And so it's actually really, a sigh of relief to say that we are not raising capital because it would be such a pain knowing it and such a distraction. And we just have no time for distractions at this time.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So, okay, so we talked on the phone about kind of why you started it, and I think for anyone listening who heard your kind of yeah, this is what we do at the beginning, can say like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I think a lot of people feel that way, and so oftentimes when there's something like this where not that it's a slam dunk in terms of, but like everybody knows what the problem is. But not everybody's like, hey, I'm going to make my own business to fix said problem because the problem in terms of tackling that problem, right? There's been I'm going to try and phrase this in a way that makes sense, but it's like there's almost been an erosion of what truth is. So you've got people saying that this piece of information is actually misinformation, and you've got people saying, well, no, it's not, it's actually facts, and then you go on the other way, and then you switch it around and like, no, this one's misinformation. Like, no, that's just a fact. And the way that you can twist things by like changing a word here and there and it sounds almost the same but completely changes the meaning of the sentence. Or the example I always bring up on the show is like RFK Jr. when he was running for president and people were saying, "Oh, you got to trust the experts." He's like, "Yeah, but I was a lawyer, environmental lawyer, and the big companies that polluted the river would have their team of experts and I would have my team of experts and they would completely disagree all the time." And so most people are like, yeah, that sucks. Like, I don't know who to believe. But you are like, yes, but I'm going to solve this problem. So where did that come from? Because that's a big problem to solve.
Yeah, I love that question, and I love what you mentioned about the kind of let's trust the experts. That tends to be something people say when the experts agree with their point of view, and it
Always.
almost and it almost and it also almost always presumes that the experts are in agreement, which, as you highlighted, they are not, and they often are not. And it's also who do you call an expert on a given topic? Because I'm not prepared to call anyone an expert if they claim to be an expert. It's a high bar for that title. Um, so to answer your question, in our case, we are looking to do something very specific. We're looking to, clear the news industry of noise. And another way of saying that is we're trying to create a trust layer between the reader and the toxic news industry, which has become and is becoming more toxic every single day. You could say that, you know, America is very polarized today. I would say it's hyper polarized, and the reality it's polarized a lot by politics. But the reality is we don't interact with politics as everyday people. We interact with news about politics. So that's like the way that we, as everyday people, interact with politics. It's not in any real tangible, direct way. It's actually through the news that get shared and told down to us about what's going on in politics. And most of the time, it doesn't even affect us, but it elicits a response because these news that talk about politics, talk about policy, they try to trigger you and elicit a response. And they always do. And we call that sort of, you can call that just clickbait news. That's what it is. You should call them trigger news. But what it essentially they do is they try to, and they successfully do polarize a community and they polarize the American society. So I think one of the biggest goals that we have is trying to, you know, ease that a little bit as much as possible by not providing news commentary, which is most of the time what news is in America. It's news commentary. We try to provide a kind of ground truth reporting, ground fact reporting of what is the reporting level facts about the issue that are commonly agreed upon among everybody, every side, even the experts, and just share those and stay clear of providing an opinion, providing charged tone, providing any sort of bias, because it seems like no other company has been able to do that. Every company somehow they just can't help themselves. They are coloring their news red or coloring their news blue, and they become sort of an op-ed for one side or another. They there's so little just objective reporting, and I even say even with Associated Press, it's you know it's not been that pure. They're probably one of the better ones. They're one of the most objective sources, but it's not been pure. There's a lot of commentary. There's a lot of charged language that I would say is suggestive of an opinion. And so I would think our biggest innovation in what we're doing with Informed is actually saying less, right? Is stopping short of giving you commentary, giving you analysis, giving you all these different opinions. It's actually just saying, here's what happened, here's when, here's where, and here's context that you should know about it, but not opinion, not charged language, none of that noisy stuff.
Yeah. I think even like the Associated Press, I think somebody called it the Associated Propaganda. So it's like yeah, it's like even that bad. It's like everybody's got some gripe to pick with someone in the sort of journalistic class. And It's interesting when you go back through the history of journalism and you like dig into some of these things, like who was paid off by who and who was working for this person and which like owner of this newspaper was friends with that senator, and so that story wasn't published. And we see these things in like even in like this is gonna show how late I am to the game, but I started watching Ted Lasso recently. Even in Ted Lasso, right? The owner of the team, like there's some article that's gonna get published, and she calls the owner of the paper and she's like, "Hey, don't publish this." And it's like even that, like not that you would agree with what the article is, right? It was a gossipy one in the show, but we just take that and we're like, "Oh yeah, that's I mean, that's what happens." But like that happens everywhere about everything, and it happens about things that are very important. Um, and I think to your point about saying less, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, I don't know if you've seen, I don't know, maybe you have, but on, do you know who Patrick Bet-David is? Is that name
I
familiar?
actually don't.
Okay, so he had this guy called Dave Smith debate this guy called Chris Cuomo who was on CNN, um, and Dave Smith is a comedian and like kind of a political commentator with a libertarian. He's in the Libertarian Party or whatever. And the debate was about COVID, right? Because they said Rogan was taking horse paste and all these things, and so they go on the show and Cuomo, who's part of the big legacy media, CNN outlets, and then this one, right, in terms of experts, he does not call himself an expert, podcaster guy. And so he's saying, "Hey, Chris, did you say this? Did you say this? Why did you say that?" Chris would go, "I didn't say that." And then they'd pull the clip up of him saying it. And it's like in real time, just like, and so it gets to the point of trust, like you mentioned. And so to say less makes a lot of sense. But how did you go about picking? Because even when you say, I'm only going to say facts, there are certain people that believe things are facts, and there's other people that don't believe the same thing is a fact. Um, and so you're going to inevitably piss somebody off. So how do you solve that? How do you solve for that? Like, what's the business model for you in terms of, okay, that idea makes total sense. How are we going to, in practice, implement this to like for it to be consumable? Like like where are your guardrails? Where do you draw the lines? Like what sorts of like how do you like what's the solve for that?
Sure. I think there's two types of bias that are important to delineate. One is editorial bias, and that's the bias in the writing itself, right? Is do you say that Congress canceled funding, or do you say Congress clawed back funding? And it's like, well, you don't have to use those words. When you use those words, you are suggesting a good amount of things, and that's just on the more implicit side. Because right, you can have editorial bias that literally just says, "Hey, this is a terrible thing." So that's right, bias in the writing, and maybe you can call it interpretive bias. And that is something that we've actually, as a company, been able to pretty much eliminate because we write so concisely. We only focus on the what, where, and when type of reporting of facts. And we don't even have enough words to try to fit bias in. And we have multiple filters. Some of them are run through AI and technology, and some of which are run through human oversight. There's always a mix of both that eliminates, like strips tonality out of our language, so it's completely neutral. And so we've been able to test that against our users who have such a broad spectrum. And they live all over the United States. They're they're very blue, they're very red, they're kind of all over the map. They're independents, they're young and old, they're executive and entry level, and they actually lean female, but they are generally a very diverse group of people. I'm just kind of walking through all the demographics. And the fact that we've been able to contain all those people on the same kind of platform and world is testimony to like, hey, we actually are getting it right. The other type of bias is curatorial bias. And that is something that is inevitable. There's nothing that we can do, anyone can do to remove curatorial bias. And that's essentially what gets included, what gets talked about. Like that bias, we don't quite put our hands up and say nothing, but it's not credible defense to say we don't have curatorial bias because we do. Everybody does. Whenever you are selecting something but not something else, even if it's a single object, you're exhibiting your what is curatorial bias. And so in our case, the way we structure it is we base our coverage on significance. And that is not a personal, Eric choice or Kira choice. It's a model, an approach that we use that is a mix of technology and a mix of human oversight. We're always combining both for the best results. Um, where we focus on the news that shape the world. And what does that mean? How much and how much does this impact the world, and how many people are being affected? So it's like the intensity and the number of people who are subject to this change, right? And so if there's a bus crash in the Philippines and 20 people die, that's terrible. And we send our condolences, and it's a terrible thing. But compare that to what Trump just did this morning, right, or yesterday afternoon, where he put 50% tariffs on um, Indian uh, imports into the US and 25% tariffs on any imports who buy Russian oil, right? So it's a type of sanction against Russia and Russia's war and terrorism, and it is you know, it's a trade threat, and it's a trade change that's going to change so many things about how much things cost, how many households can afford it, how many businesses go under as a result, what the diplomacy between the two countries or many countries is going to be. That is changing the world so much more. And so it always prioritize that level of world shaping. And we have a model of that is essentially following a utilitarian approach, which is like how many people are affected, how much, and that's what we use to sort of, stand our ground on the curatorial bias side. It's like we don't really have a bias, we have a model. And if you subscribe to this model, which is world shaping news, then then you're here with us. If you're not, there are many other places where you can get information. Can't guarantee it's going to be pure, but there are many other curations out there.
Are you hiring journalists to go run down these stories, or like how do you find the ones that you go through? And the reason I ask that is because I think the universities have a very strong left lean. I don't think that's controversial to say. I think the ratio was like 13 professors to one lean left or something along those lines. I don't remember and
Yeah,
it varies from field to field, of course. Um, but if you're hiring journalists and you want to keep the news pure and concise, and how do you solve for that as well? And it's not even saying that one way of thinking is right or wrong, but just you have a a lean in that industry towards one side or the other. And for you, that wants, I don't even want to say you want to shoot straight down the middle because that's not really what it is that you're doing. You're just saying the
right.
things that are happening and you're presenting it to people in a way that's digestible. But at the same time, you've got this thing that is existing. Like, so when you go through the hiring process again of the curative, like the curated bias in terms of what to talk about, I mean, what you said makes sense. But also you, Kira, don't write every story or do all these things. So as your company grows, do you have a plan for that? Have you thought about that? Or like what are your thoughts on
Absolutely.
that?
I love that question, and I definitely agree. It's kind of a separate realm that we should touch on is how do we also we essentially we keep our news um, free of bias in whatever the way that we can. We sort of guard every direction. One is we you know don't read news that are not trustworthy or that are colored, like red or blue colored. Two is we are very, very short. And you're kind of bringing up there's another realm, which is protecting the objectivity of news from the input of our team. And that's something that we take very, very seriously. So I would say we don't really hire journalists. Journalists is a bit of a dirty word for us because journalists are the reason everything is broken a little bit, right? Like the reason the news industry has become so toxic is in part, because journalists made it so. And I would want to call journalists out like as individual contributors, but the conglomerates that run the news industries, which very much are conglomerate-esque, like the NBC conglomerate is half of the news we eat in America. They have broken the news. And so taking people from that environment, the journalists, and showing them our way is actually a lot of extra work because we are disruptors in this space. We are people who want to be better than what's been done, right? We're not writing more. Journalists thrive on writing things. We thrive on reducing things, right? It's like we get excited when we can relate meaning in shorter amount of words. We get excited about that. I don't know a lot of journalists who get excited about writing shorter and shorter articles every day, which is like
Yeah,
our
I
benchmark.
don't know.
And so we actually hire researchers, right, who don't have the same kind of left-leaning, university background. I mean, they do come from universities, but they come from a schooling that is a lot more around investigative kind of research rather than, writing opinions. You kind of have these two profiles. This one boy was working in a college like newspaper, right? That's one type. And this one girl was in research labs in political science, doing what is called OSINT, which is open source investigation. It's
Hmm.
like an approach to research, and writing reports, tracking terrorism, tracking developments of sentiment. And so, who do you think we're going to hire? We're not going to hire the one to be journalist. We're going to hire the one to be like researcher, an investigator. And that is the type of skill set that we look for. It's an OSINT skill set and it's a researcher pedigree. It is not necessarily a writing pedigree or a journalism pedigree. And so it's a little bit different. What you're saying about universities is true either way, though. There is a left-leaning side to that hiring, but I don't think we attract people, and I definitely we don't hire people who want to lean into their bias. We hire people who are attracted to the objectivity of what we do and that whole mission behind that, because that's just a culture fit, right? We can see through that. If like you're someone who gets excited about politics in a partisan way, that's great, but we don't. Uh, it would be hard for you to fit into our culture.
Yeah. And you segued into the next question, which is kind of you're in Silicon Valley. Again, not to make the whole thing about this, but I feel like this is just a fact at this point. You're the space that you exist in leans that way. And so are you concerned about one disrupting the news space? And I would say that you've got a head start in disruption because I think podcasts and online news, right? The Tim Pools of the world and some of these other the Matt Taibbi's on Substack and Glenn Greenwald's and all these other people who have gone independent have done a fairly good job of well, and the news themselves have done a great job of embarrassing themselves. They don't really need any help from anyone else. But in any event, you're going to end up kind of cutting into a market of information and attention, and which attention is currency at this point. How many ads are on your YouTube video? How many views are on the YouTube video? How many watch hours do you get on your videos or your streams or whatever? And so you're cutting into a lot of different, potentially cutting into a lot of different um, established industries. Does that, and going against the grain in the area in which that you exist, the technology kind of space, does that concern you at all? Have you got pushback or like how, or did you not, you're just like, no, this is the right thing to do and I'm going to do it anyways. Like, where do you fall on that sort of spectrum of thoughts, ideas?
I would say it's definitely the latter that you said, in that this is the right thing to do, right? It's like the world, the everyday person has been overwhelmed, has been misinformed, has been solicited, and has been influenced at every step of the journey of them trying to catch up with what's going on in the world. And that's terrible. Like we have broken news as a type of media. We've broken news as an industry. We've sold off the reader of news to the advertisers, and it is frankly, it's unacceptable. And I think more and more people are waking up to that realization. And some people have resigned from reading news altogether. I know a lot of people who read none of the news. The reason they don't is because the news have been so difficult to read. I don't blame them. Like we have spoiled the what is it called, the pond or the drinking well,
Hmm.
and it's poisoned. So I'm not surprised nobody drinks from it. What we're doing is one, the right thing by our users, by the readers who want to not be hijacked and not be, clickbait held hostage in their experience of reading news. And also, I think we're doing the industry a huge favor because we are bringing people into the world of news that are otherwise would not never come back again, right? It's like they've been so traumatized by every advertisement in the middle of the paragraph, on the side of the paragraph, pop-up advertisement that starts playing without your consent. Trying to sell you a car, trying to sell you socks, trying to sell you this one trick that doctors hate. All along, it's
The one
those
trick
people are
that
gone.
doctors hate is like
I know.
everywhere.
I know. That's what news is these days, right? And that can't be anymore because we live in a politically urgent environment in the world and in America where you need to know what's going on. The world is changing very, very quickly. And if you rely on getting that secondhand from your friends, like it reaches you when it reaches you, it will be way too late to do something about it. And you don't want to disenfranchise yourself. I don't think a lot of people do. And yeah, we are bringing people into the news industry that otherwise are gone. And so, if anything, we should be praised by all our competitors and all the kind of legacy media because we're reestablishing the market for news readership. We're just doing it in a way that we're not looking to compromise is right for the readers.
Yeah, maybe you should be praised, but you know that's not coming from your competitors.
No,
Um, what do you do with I think a large
it's going to be a love-hate relationship, and it has been, and I think it will
yeah.
continue to be a love-hate relationship.
Yeah, 100%. So what do you do with like the people that are done with the news like all together? How do you bring them back, right? And in a way that because it's easy to say, "Oh yeah, you should check out our news thing." And people are like, "Yeah, yeah, I've heard that before. There's been tons of apps or whatever. Now I'm good." Like how do you bring so I'll leave that thought there and then add the other thought of actually, you know what? Let's go with that one first and then I'll ask the other one afterwards.
Sure. So how do we kind of like how do we invite the resigned reader back into readership? I mean, we do so with, I mean, you have to choose it. We cannot force demand on the market. We never should, never will. We are not looking to save every single person under the sun, right? It's not really possible. It's a ludicrous ambition. We are there for people who are looking for us, right? Turns out that's a huge number of people. Turns out that's also a number of people that's constantly growing because the news industry keeps getting worse and worse, and the people who are getting fed up with that is growing daily. And so it's like the not all the people who resign will be looking for solutions to get back in, but a large share will. And that's who we serve. We can't save every single person out there. We're not right for every single person out there. But for the person that wants a solution, we are the only game in town when it comes to our extreme approach to media minimalism and to news minimalism, where we intentionally try to give you back your time. We intentionally reduce certain functionality so that you can only spend 30 seconds reading news a day. Like you actually could not use us for more than 30 seconds a day by design. And we are intentionally offline on the weekends because we have this whole idea that you should not read news on the weekends. Um, but we are there for you every day of the work week. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like you couldn't use us for more than 30 seconds a day, even if you really wanted to, you couldn't. And so keeping it so minimalist, so stripped down, so like reduced, uh, it is a kind of welcoming, right? We don't email you. We don't have you make an account. We have no way of tracking your behavior. There is no, click tracking, source tracking. There's none of that stuff. We don't even look at your open rates because we can't. We operate a very minimalist channel, which is SMS. And a lot of our users, this is crazy, are anonymous. We don't even know who they are. All we know about them is their phone number, which doesn't tell you anything in this country. Nothing. You can't learn anything about a person through their phone number. And so I would say a good share of our users are anonymous entirely. And we like that because we want to give them the privacy, the space, the ability to just like, you can be your own person. You don't have to be targeted by us every step of the way the news companies would do it. And I think that is inviting to a lot of people. But again, not for everyone under the sun. Some people are not right for us and we're not right for them. And that's completely fine.
Yeah. What do you think happens to the big news conglomerate once the kind of like the older demographics, not to be morbid, but move to a different stage of life?
Yeah, as they retire from news readership completely.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
that's a nice way of putting it.
yeah, they do read a lot of news.
Like
I,
they're
I
the ones
think,
that are on Fox. Like if you look at Fox and MSNBC and
yeah,
CNN demographics, it's all like people past like 65 plus. And that's why also if somebody was to watch that show, like 80% of the ads are for
yeah,
like
retirement.
like retirement homes and like pills from Big Pharma about your back pain and Crohn's disease and like whatever other thing that they've cooked up that week
Totally.
in the meth lab of Big Pharma. So, like, what do you think happens? Like, in we'll just I don't know when that occurs. What do you think happens to them and news more generally?
I hope that they contract because I don't endorse what they've done. I don't think what they've done has been good. I actually would say I would go even further and say that, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I have a really high, or rather, I have a really high bar for the conspiracies I do that have my buy-in. But I would say like the polarization of this country is a product of the news industry, like 100%. Because of what I mentioned earlier, is that we don't, as everyday people, we don't interact with news or with politics. We interact with news about politics. And the way they get fed to us by Fox, by CNN, by CNBC, by AP, by anyone under the sun is the reason for polarization, right? Haven't touched, uh, most people unfortunately haven't even like touched anything political in their life, but everyone has touched political news. It's in the bar that you go to. It's at the work. It's everywhere you go. It's in a taxi cab in New York in your face. It's everywhere you go. There is anchors talking, 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 and giving you this commentary. And the news industry has caused so much harm because they haven't been informing people. They have been influencing people. And at this point, we're seeing the radical extent of that. Like the country is in an informational civil war as we speak. And this is a product of the conglomerates that we mentioned earlier. And so, in many ways, I look forward to the contraction of them losing that older, previous generation demographic because I think as millennials age, I don't think they're going to go into Fox News
Oh, no
or
shot. No,
right.
none of
And
them.
and and there is too much of a frustration with what's been happening. So it's like I wouldn't say that the conglomerates can rely on like an age category. It was an age category of a certain generation. And once that
Yeah.
generation fully retires, I genuinely don't think that they're going to need to pivot, and they're going to need to pivot very, very sharply to do right by users who are increasingly resigning their from their uh, you know media. So I think a wave of companies like ours that are looking to pioneer a way to read news differently, right? There is a couple of other names that do different forms of news digest and news analysis and news commentary, and I think it's great. I think the rise of like the independent startup journalism is and startup reporting is going to be helped by these trends of people kind of, you know, okay, I don't not can't be here anymore. Where do I go? Oh, I like this app. Oh, I like this service. I like this editor. I like this approach. We are proudly the most extreme of them all because are we're almost like reporters. We're not really journalists. We just do reporting. And so we actually serve as a layer that a lot of other journalist companies that do analysis and reporting use. And we have a lot of journalists subscribe to us. The journalists that feel like, okay, I see what you're doing and it's actually really good. It's not a bad thing. So we have a lot of commentators, analysts, political shows that actually subscribe to us as their plug for news, as their plug for reporting. And I think that's going to continue to grow because we are like the most extreme, uh, the most extreme version of rejecting the legacy news media.
Are these the ones you mentioned? Most of the users are anonymous. Do they just like make it known to you, like, hey, I'm so and so from whatever outlet, I subscribe to your thing?
So anyone is anonymous by default unless they choose to tell us things.
Ah, okay.
And we would always ask, like, hey, like, do you want to tell us your name? You don't have to, but you could. And some people are like, yeah, my name is Eric Jennings, and I run this show that's meant to inspire and share stories about the world, and we should collaborate. Or, and like, I've been reading you a lot. And we're like, hey, that's awesome. Like, good to be friends. And we can learn things about our users if they choose to tell us. The beauty is they don't have to. They don't have to actually tell us much. And that's something I think it's a right that we want to maintain and that we want to kind of, give them. And you can't do that anywhere else. Like nowhere else can you be truly anonymous.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the anonymity is default, but it is optional. You don't have to retain it. It's not like Reddit.
You mentioned that you have a high bar for believing in some conspiracy things. You wanna throw some out there just for funsies, or we can avoid that question if you want.
Well, the thing is, I was kind of joking a little bit. I really don't feel like I am uh, subscribe to any conspiracy theory. I just, as a person with economic training and like an economist, like university training, I do feel like there is just market forces and just like the cause and effect forces that you can have an interpretive version of like, hey, like I think the reason this happened is because of this. So I wouldn't say I'm a conspiracist in any way, but I'm just like looking at the market, I'm applying the economic thinking of like cause effect incentives, why people do certain things, and as certain things just emerge. And I think one that I like to believe in, and I think is credible, is the conspiracy of, I think it's actually really relevant to what we're talking about, is the fact that like right now, news is not is not free, really. The news has never been free, but we read it and we're like, oh, news is free. That's great. Um, that's like a common Silicon Valley understanding. If you're not paying for a product and it gives you value, you are the product. Like you are the one that's being sold. And the great conspiracy in the news industry is that, something like 20 years ago, right, in the early innings of the internet, the news companies have actually sold the readers off to the advertisers. And we see that left and right. That's why there are so many ads, is because we are the product of the news industry. We are not, our eyeballs, our attention is the commodity that they sell to advertisers. We are no longer the user, the customer, because we don't pay, right? You align the business to whoever pays for your business. And the news industry is paid, a lion's share by advertisers. And so I don't know if that's a conspiracy or not, but the reason we got to a broken news world today is because 20 years ago, users stopped paying for news. They're like, you know what? I'll just get it secondhand from my friend Eric. And there are so many options proliferating because of the internet. It's like, hey, like anyone can be a news company. All you have to do is blog about things. At some point, it's like, shit, like we're not gonna have a business. And then the advertisers came and said, hey, we're a big pharma. Just put some mention of Crohn's disease, and here you can take this quiz, and here's the tricks that your doctor will hate. Just put that on this display, and we'll pay for your news. We'll pay for everyone's news more than they'll ever pay you. and we'll pay it upfront right away, nothing to worry about, annual contract. And everybody said yes. And that is the worst. Like that is why everything has happened the way it has happened. And is it a conspiracy? I don't think so. I think it's just looking at the market and tracing it over a couple of years, seeing the share of advertiser revenue across the large companies and seeing that go from nothing to everything, and now seeing that all our news are are filled with it. So is it a conspiracy? You tell me.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it is a con maybe a conspiracy by the fact that you have people like working to conspire to pay people money or whatever, but I don't know. That was a very diplomatic answer. You could have said something like aliens or something fun. No, 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 I joke. So, from your brain, the economist side of your brain, I've had some people talk about the tariffs on here before. You mentioned the tariffs earlier. Um, and my question was all to them, and the thing that I don't understand was, okay, well, if tariffs are a tax on trade, and taxes, generally speaking, I would say disincentivize that behavior, right? If you want to incentivize the behavior more, you don't put fees on it and things of that nature. So free trade seems like a good idea. Now, on the other hand, lots of people have tariffs on us even before Trump was in office. There are tariffs on US imports places and tariffs have been a thing for however long. And so then it's like, if tariffs are so good, then why don't we have just like 1,000% tariffs on everything? It's like, okay, so neither of those is the complete truth. So it seems like some tariffs are a good idea, others not so much. I think people were maybe um it seemed like the way it was rolled out was slightly haphazard by, oh yeah, we're gonna do it off trade deficits or whatever, but that doesn't make any sense either because like the example that's always used is you and I have a trade deficit with the grocery store, but we still get our food, and it's a willing trade deficit, right? So explain, well, what like you mentioned before the show that you're like, okay, yeah, this was a good idea that he did this in this particular instance regarding um India and the Russian oil and things of that nature. So explain, just like give your two cents because I've had a guy on here that does e-commerce stuff and he's like, oh, people were freaking out about the tariffs, but long term they'll come good. And I've also had some Wall Street guys be like, oh, it's not a good idea at all because of XYZ reasons, and I can see the merits to both ways. So
Totally. I think it's a really complicated subject that like I think gets trickled down to us in like oh, tariffs good, tariffs bad. It's like I think a lot so people don't really understand anything about what that means, and so it's worth unpacking a little bit like what are the different sides of tariffs. And tariffs, just to say that they are complicated because every country has a tariff on every other country. And that tariff may be zero, but every country has a policy of how they trade with another country. And that's a phenomenally complex system because there's, let's say there's 200 countries in the world, roughly, and each of them has 200 policies for every other country or bloc. It's an extremely complicated system because every one of those policies, changes the flow of trade for also everyone involved in that system. It's like an extremely complex system that isn't just about America or Trump saying, "Hey, we're going to put a tariff on you because we don't like you, or because we like you, or because we had a nice conversation." It's not that simple. The other thing about tariffs is that it's also about protecting the domestic industry, right? In the sense of if if we make cars and the Japanese make cars, if the Japanese cars for some reason are cheaper or Korean cars are cheaper and they flood our market, the US market, like everyone goes out of business here. And so how much do we protect? And we don't have to handhold anybody. If you can't handle it, you should be out of business. But how much do we protect like a country's industry specifically so that we have our own like self-sufficiency, where we have our own thing. So if another country goes to war or another country goes to war with us, we're still able to buy cars and have cars. So tariffs are also about protectionism, and protectionism isn't, an all bad thing. You need to protect and support some industries in the country. Tariffs also play a role to do that because they make imports more expensive, and so they make the local cars more affordable, right? And so with the cars, that's definitely been a big push this year. Local cars are a lot more affordable, and they're having a good year, having a very good year. Probably a conspiracy, if I had to guess, with Donald Trump, but it's been a very good year for the domestic car industry. So it's about protectionism. And the third thing, it is also about like income for the country itself, of like there are certain there are certain contexts where you could, as a country, make more money by taxing some of this product that is still ultimately going to be traded. You're going to make a little bit more money in essentially tax revenue. Now, you could be making that money off of your own citizens or of the importers, but there is ways of you to kind of have more favorable trade. And so I would also say this point is maybe a little bit confusing. I think it's a negotiating lever where you can open other markets to your product in a much more substantial way, right? So, for example, now with a few deals that have been struck, um, you know, US can now export free to another country, which means like the US has more ability to sell, more ability to make money, which obviously will be taxed anyway. But it's now you're opening a market for free to Vietnam, to Thailand, to Cambodia, and you can sell whatever it is. It could be drop shipping e-commerce to these new markets. But that agreement of like your tariffs on us should be lower is a matter of negotiation. And in that case, tariffs are a negotiation lever. And so there's kind of like three different functions: protecting your industry, um, negotiating access to other markets that is advantageous. And what was the first one I said? Um,
I don't remember either.
Me neither. I've been talking for so long about this. Just to unpack how much complexity is in this whole tariff world, my take is that it's mostly being used for negotiation right now to like access to other markets. It's not really about um, I think it's only a little bit about protectionism. And yeah, it makes things more expensive. And that's not great. But if it does, in the end of the day, open access to other markets, that might be worth it. I do agree with you entirely that the way they've been enrolled has been very haphazardly, but because they're being used primarily for negotiations, that may just be a negotiating tactic. And I think it's hard to tell. Like, I think with what's going on in the administration, it's hard to tell a lot of things, but I also think things are not what they seem. And things are not what they seem. Things are rarely what they seem, I think, with this administration, and time will tell. I think we're in the early innings. It's only been 6 months. It's only been, 7 months. We're going to see a lot more of this disruption, and some good might come out of it. I really do think so. Um, anyway, this has been a lot of blabber to your question because, hey, that's a tough topic to
Yeah.
riff on.
Yeah, it is. No, 100%. And yeah, I did put you on the spot a little bit, but I think like we were talking about before in terms of people having different opinions on things, it doesn't mean that these opinions are wrong, right? And to your point about things being more expensive, I was talking with somebody the other day about news landscape and then how that relates to health, right? We see things with seed oils and like which things are actually going to give us cancer and which are not. And it's tough to tell because the way that certain systems are set up with insurance and all the rest. And what I was saying was kind of to that individual was like, we're gonna be in for a rough ride while things correct themselves. And like nobody's saying that you're gonna snap your fingers and things are gonna be running smoothly overnight. Like there's a lot of things to unscrew in a variety of industries and a variety of situations. And like when giant systems come undone, there's going to be a period of chaos while things sort themselves out, and people are going to have to take some level of responsibility for themselves and do their due diligence on whatever, whether it's news or health or research into whatever the thing is and ask people around you. Like this is one of the things that I love about the podcast is I've got now loads of people that are very knowledgeable in certain subjects that something pops on the news and I'm like, that doesn't seem right. Let me go ask whoever, like news. Let me go ask Kira or like whatever the situation is. And to your point before, it's like that takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of energy and maybe AI can help in some way with that. But like you said about things not being what they seem, I gotta know. I think drawing conclusions at this stage is much too early. And I don't know. We're kind of in a exactly like you said, we're kind of in a wait and see. And it doesn't mean that things are gonna go smoothly right off the bat. There's lots of things going on, and sometimes when there's disruption, those entrenched systems don't like the disruption, and there's going to be some chaos and some conflict. So, um, yeah, I don't know. Have I not asked you anything that I should have, whether about anything on Informed or anything about you that you want to make sure that we talk about before we wrap up?
Yeah. I don't think so. I think we've had this is a really delightful discussion, and I enjoyed, coming on. I would say if anyone who's listening is interested or is drawn to what we talked about on the informed side, would love to get your feedback on our work. And it's very simple. We operate America's next big toll-free number, kind of like 800 flowers or 800 got junk, although we're not like junk. Um, it's very simple. So you actually just text our number, and all you have to do is text join to 844-406 info, which is the same as 844-406-4636. You can also go to our website, which is informed.now, and check out our work and our news minimalism that we pioneer here. And it would be delightful to have more folks join our mission.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. You did the plug, and I didn't even have to ask you for it. Awesome. Um, For those listening, links and well, or phone number in this case will be in the description. As usual, go check it out. I think it's worthwhile, even just to see it for a couple days, and then if you don't like it, then you can unsubscribe yourself. But it's super simple, and if you were looking for an easy way to digest things, I would say go for it for sure. Obviously, well, I mean, of course. Um, any last nickels before we get you out of here?
No, this has been exciting. And do you have that the question that you want to ask
No, no,
the
surprise,
next host?
surprise, surprise.
Oh,
It's always surprise, right? Because then I'd have people cheating and going and looking at the end of the episode.
true, true.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah,
We
yeah.
should then stop recording.
Yeah, we will. All right, guys. Obviously, like I just said, phone number in the description, link will be in the description. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace. Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you want to watch another episode like this one, click there. If you want to subscribe, click there.